last week we looked at chapter 4. The Kohelet talks about the horizontal aspect of our life, that God made us for others. We're not made for ourselves. We're made for others. Now, Kohelet turn into what is something deeper and more important, that the other aspect of our life, that is the vertical aspect of our lives. Not only that we're made for others, but we can only be made for others, live for others, if first and foremost we worship God. So today we're going to look at that vertical aspect of our lives, that we are made to worship God. We are made for worship. So Kohelet reminds us that, okay, it's good that you live for others, but if you live for others without first live for God, you're going to be exhausted. You're going to be burned out. Everything going to be just for as duty. Anything that is duty bound rather than desires and love and treasures that you actually enjoy doing will not last. So today we're going to look at worship. We are made for worship, but what is worship? See, worship is not just one part of our life. It's not just one aspect of our life among many things that we do. No, worship is the defining center of who we are. It's the center of who we are. So what is it? What is worship? Some people may think that worship is singing to God as we come and sing to God. Some people think it's praying to God, that's worship. Others think, well, when I give to God, that's worship. They are all worship, but that's not the very essence, the core of what worship is. Now, Kohelet the preacher doesn't assume we know what worship is and how to do it. So that's why he writes this and reminds us what worship is. In a way that he explained it, he said what is not worship. But from there we can learn what is worship. So we live in this day of an age that deeply values authenticity. Right? We love that, being authentic. Whether music, whether it's food or how we dress or fashion, or even in our faith, we value authenticity. There's instinctive rejection in our lives of anything that feels kind of fake, ingenuine, manufactured, or ritualistic. We just don't like that. People today say things like, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Perhaps your colleagues have said that to you. Or, when it comes to religion and spirituality, I just try to be true to myself. Right? That's the values of our age today, being authentic. And that has shaped how many of us come to worship God as well. Some believe that the truest form of expression is from the inside out. How do you worship? It has to be from the inside out, right? So that's how we get that idea of self-expression in our worship. In other words, if it's not from the inside, if it's not spontaneous, if it is not emotionally charged, then it is not sincere. So some of us think that. It has to be spontaneous. If you're praying, you can't have it written down. Perhaps you've heard people say that. If you're leading prayer, you say, well, don't write it down. It should be spontaneous. It should come from the inside. Otherwise, it's not sincere. It's fake. But here's the irony. In our obsession with being authentic, being real, we've often made worship about ourselves. From the inside, from who you are. It becomes a performance in itself, you see. Where you need to feel something before you can do it, or you need to be moved before it becomes real and genuine. And yet, what if real worship isn't about you, how you feel, but about who God is? What if the deepest problem isn't too many rituals, or whether your prayer is written down or not, but there are too little reverence to God whom we worship? And we've seen last week that we are made for others, but we cannot do that. We cannot obey that unless we are first grasp this idea that we are made for worship. So Kohelet, and the preacher, the teacher, writing here in chapter 5 reflectively, and again, unfortunately, he doesn't offer us a simple solution, simple answers. Follow these steps and you'll be fine in your worship now. Rather, he wrestles with life under the sun. But the beauty in this is, he hasn't been, his observation's always been under the sun, but now he tried to take a peek what is above the sun. So he points us to worship, and that's only possible when he look up above the sun. So in this chapter, Ecclesiastes 5, Kohelet shows us that worship is, we're going to look at what it is by exposing what it is not. So bear with me, because then we have to translate. He said, worship isn't this, so what is it? So we're going to be looking at that a lot. So he calls out the danger of superficial worship. So he said, this is superficial worship. This is not real worship. That's what he's saying, right? That spiritual worship is shallow. It is thoughtless. And through this passage, we're going to look at three things. The first thing is the danger of this superficial, shallow worship. And then we're going to look at what keep us away from true and real worship. And finally, how we can truly worship God. Makes sense, yeah? So the first one, the danger of this superficial and shallow worship. So chapter 5, 1-7 warns us against this kind of worship, thoughtless kind of worship, where it's all about ritual, but there's no reference towards God. It's all about words, plenty of words, but without weightiness of glory, or it's devotion without depth. That is shallow. That is superficial. In verse 1, it says this. So this is the first thing we're going to look at. The three things we're going to look at in this part. First, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil. Kohelet's about to give us three specific warnings in this short passage. The three warnings are, first, guard your step when you worship, when you come to the house of God. Second thing, he says, watch your words. That's in verse 2 and 3 we're going to look at. And finally, he says, watch your promise. So three things, three sub-points. So I'm going to give you more points here. So sub-point 1, you're going to say, guard your steps, watch your words, and watch your promise. Three things. The danger of superficial worship. Guard your steps when you come to worship. What does it mean? This isn't about literal steps. It's not about, well, there are steps outside, there are stairs. So when you come to the house of God, be careful, otherwise you're going to trip and fall over. It's not about that, though you should be careful as well. I don't want you to get tripped over and say, well, it's not about the steps. It is, but that's not what he's talking about here. It's about our attitude. Guard your steps. It's about our heart posture when we come to worship God. He said, guard your step. Don't approach God casually, like dropping in on your neighbor for a casual chat. He said, don't do that when you come to the house of God. Some of us come to the house of God casually. It's like, so chill. Say, guard your step. Think about Moses when Moses meets God at the burning bush. This is what it says in Exodus 3, verse 5. Then God said, don't come near, take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. come with reference when you come to worship God. Of course, in the original context, the house of God here for Kohelet is the temple, the second temple of God in Jerusalem, which is a place of sacrifice and a place of prayer. But today, it refers to a gathered believers, where people gathered, Christian gathered together to worship Him. It's not a building. That's why this is a church, even though we're in a community center. This is a church because when God's people gather together and worship Him in unity and pray and listen to His word, this is the house of God. And this is what Kohelet say, guard your steps. How is your heart posture? How is your attitude when you come to the house of God? And he says in verse 1, this haunting phrase, the sacrifice of fools. Verse 1. Did you see that? What does it mean? The sacrifice of fools. Ecclesiastes 5 verse 1. The sacrifice of fools. Well, this is not a criticism of the act of sacrifice itself, the sacrifice of fools. It's a warning that you can do all the right thing outwardly towards God. You can come, you can worship God, you say the right words, you sing the right tunes, you clap the right beats, which I rarely can do. It's not about getting all the outward acts right. That's not what he's talking about when it comes to sacrifice. He talks about the heart that is far from God. You can do all that right, but if your heart is far from God, there's no reference in your approach to God, then all you do are the sacrifice of fools. So sacrifice of fools are those who give, in a way, something that you don't really think through, prepared well, and oftentimes even the leftovers, so to speak. Rather than preparing from the night before Sunday, like tomorrow I'm going to church. I'm gonna sleep well tonight. I always tell my kids, Sunday, we're going to church. We're going to worship God. Do not sleep late. That's part of preparing our hearts to worship. But giving the leftover, sacrifice of fools is like this. You say, well, tomorrow I know I'm going to come to the house of God and worship Him. But I'm going to party tonight until 2 a.m., 3 a.m. I'm going to sleep for half an hour. I'm going to come to church tired. My heart is not prepared. I don't even know where I put my Bible. But I'm just going to come. This is what Kohelet is warning us. The sacrifice of fools. People may see that the outward doing seems right. Well, you showed up. You give. You sing. You pray. But yet your heart is far from God. Now, in the Old Testament context, God instructed them to give only the best to God. The best to God. Leviticus 22, verse 20. You shall not offer anything that has a blemish. This is why Isaac shared a couple of weeks ago in the announcement during the offering. He said how his grandparents used to, during the week, go to the bank, take out brand new notes. And if it's not brand new notes, they would iron the notes before they're offering it to God. Those are not man-made rules. No one made that rules. Those come from the heart that want to please God, that want to give the best to God. Here say, you shall not offer anything that has a blemish, for it will not be acceptable for you. And Leviticus 22, verse 22, couple of verses down. Animals blind or disabled or mutilated or having a discharge or an itch or scabs, you shall not offer to the Lord, and give them to the Lord as a food offering on the altar. You shall not give any of those. You got to check thoroughly. And Exodus 23, verse 19, the best of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. The best of your first fruit is not your last, but your first. It's not like, I'm going to eat my produce, what I've earned, the harvest that I gather. If they're left over, then I'm going to give it to God. God says, no. gather your harvest, give the best of your first fruit to God. You don't stay up late and give the 10% battery of your energy to God. God says give the first 10% of your fully charged energy to Him and offer Him as a worship. See, worship that costs us nothing is the sacrifice of fools, 1 Kohelet. And not only that, he said it is evil. Do you see that? The sacrifice of fool. Not only it's not unacceptable, it is evil before God. That's the first thing. Guard your steps. The second thing, he said, watch your words in verse 2 and 3. This is the second warning. Be not rash with your words, with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God, for God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few, for a dream comes with much business, and a fool's voice with many words. Now, why does Kohelet caution against many words? Now, I'm rebuked by this. As you know, I preach the longest in this church, because the reason is this. God is in heaven and you are on earth. That is so true. That is so simple. He said, let your words be few, because He's in heaven and you are on earth. What does it mean? Right? Well, this is a geography lesson. This is not a matter of geographical position, that God is in heaven and you're not. No, it is a matter of theology. God is holy. You are not. God is sovereign. You are finite. Therefore, when you come to God, don't come with many words. Imagine being in the presence of a human king. I'm just curious here. How many of you been in presence of human king? Okay, great. Prime minister, right? Queens and presidents, important people. If you've been in the presence of such royalty, human royalty, I can bet you won't be too quick to speak. You wouldn't blabber about your life in the presence of king. Now, if they say you can speak, let's say for, you're an amazing person, they say when you meet the king, when you meet the queen, when you meet the president, you are given time to speak. What would you do? You would prepare what you're going to say. You wouldn't just say, I'm just going to rock up. Whatever comes to my mind, I'm just going to say it. You wouldn't do that. You will come with reference. You would weigh your words carefully. You would type it. You would read it out to your spouse and say, does it sound good? Is it okay? You happy with that? You think it's anything wrong with that? You would weigh your words carefully. How much more when you come before God of the universe, in the presence of the King of Kings? So watch your words, Kohelet say. The third thing, third warning, he said, watch your promise. Watch your vow. He says, verse 4, when you vow a vow to God, do not delay paying it, for He has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. Now, we often make vows when we're desperate, don't we? Yeah? Right? Give me this job, and I will give you generously back. Or give me a child, and I will give you my service. If you have children and they're all boys, and they say, give me a daughter, and I will do this. Or if you're all daughters, you say, give me a son, then I will give you. We do all sort of things like that. And if you're married, you say vows in your marriage, in your wedding day too, right? Or if your marriage in trouble, your spouse say, I'm going to leave you. You pray to God and say, save my marriage, Lord, and I promise to love my spouse better. We say all sort of promises, but as soon as the crisis passes, we often forget about our vows. And many of us pray, God, give me this job. But as soon as we got the job, we forget about our vows. Kohelet say, don't do that. In fact, Kohelet say, you don't have to say vows. He said, it's better not to even say vow than to make one and not keep it. There's a sobering story in the book of Acts about this couple by the name of Ananias and Sapphira. It's a terrible, sobering story, actually. They sold a piece of land and pretended to give all the proceeds that what they sold of the land to the house of God, to God. But they secretly withheld some from the proceed. God never requires them to do that. They wanted to do that, but they deceive. And what happened is God sent his immediate divine judgment upon them. Now, the issue wasn't the amount that they gave to God, it was their pretense. They wanted spiritual credit without sacrifice. God was making a point that worship isn't a performance. You can fool people, you can fool your brothers and sisters, you can fool your pastors, you can fool your spouse even, but you can never mock and fool God. Jesus says in Matthew 5:37, let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. So, today's equivalent of vows, obviously, marriage vow in a wedding, that we vow to be faithful to our spouse, that we will sacrifice for our spouse, and there's no expiry date, till death do us part, or until Christ return, right? No, like I love you and I'm going to care for you until I no longer feel love, or until I, whatever. No, there's no expiry date. That's our vow. Or in church membership too, we have equivalent of that. The vows of, I'm going to pray for the church, I'm going to give, I'm going to serve, I'm going to support the church. Or if you say, no, I don't do any of those, I'm not married, I'm not a member of a church, but if you come to church and sing, a lot of our songs, we trick you into it. A lot of our songs are a vow to God, a promise to God, right? How many songs in the songs that we sing, it's like, I surrender my life. I give you my life. If you pay attention, a lot of them are vows to God, a promise to God. Now, you may say, why does God care so much about how we worship him? Why it seems like so many don't do this and don't do that? Why is that? Where's the freedom in expressing myself, my true, authentic self? Where is that, right? Well, that's a fair question, one that I believe resonates with many of modern people, postmodern people. But think of it like this. If that's one of you who questions like, where's the freedom in worshiping God? Where's this authentic self come into place, right? Think about it like this. If you're meeting a king, like before I said, like a prime minister, now this is what you wouldn't do. You wouldn't just show up casually in shorts and sunnies with a latte on your hand, in your hands, like, hey, King Charles, how you doing? You don't do that. You don't just stroll in casually. Yet, with the King of Kings, we want to I want freedom. I want my authentic self. I only wear shorts and tank tops. And that's how I'm going to do it. My words always harsh. This is who I am. So that's how I'm going to come to the house of God. So reverence is natural response to greatness. If we don't have reverence when it comes to the house of God, then we know your view of how small God is in your life. Because reverence always comes as a response of greatness. Now consider the infinite God who is holy and just and good. If he exists, and I believe he does, Kohelet then says, worship must be on his term, not yours. I hope you get that. If God is this great king of the universe, then when we come and worship him, it has to be on his terms, not your terms. Not you say, I dictate how I come to God, but God dictates how we come to him. He doesn't need our worship. He doesn't. Worship is for our own good. But when we come to him in worship, we need to worship rightly. Because when we worship him rightly, it reorients our heart correctly. It's sort of like giving us the right frequency. It set our path correctly If we're walking just 1 degree off, when we worship Him, our heart is set 1 degree to the right way, to the right directions. It sets the right frequency to the heartbeats, to our heartbeats. He doesn't need it, but it's for you and I. It reminds us also when we come to worship Him of who He is. So what keeps us then from true worship? Why do we fall into shallow, superficial worship? What is going on? What is going on in our hearts? Well, the first reason what's going on is because we forget who He is. We forget who He is. We forget who He is, and we forget who we are. We forget our place. And that keeps us from true worship. When we forget this, our worship becomes careless, becomes shallow, becomes self-focused. So we come to worship, it's like, well, I don't like the music. I don't like the singing. Why people say that? Because it's self-focused. Do you think when you come to worship, it's about you? No, it's about God. And when we pray, it becomes transactional. It's like, God, if I do this, you do that for me. It becomes transactional. Our songs become sentimental to us. Inward looking, it doesn't move my heart. It's too slow, or it's too loud, or it's too fast paced. It's self-focused. And our offering, when you give, often becomes casual and optional. And when we give, we expect something back from God as well. So we have reduced a holy God to an imagination of some kind of a spiritual being that we can control and manage, that He is within our power to control. Think about it. If you come and approach God in such a way, then you think this holy God you can manipulate, you can control, that you can manage in your life, you can negotiate with. Tim Keller says this in The Reason of God. Only if your God can outrage and challenge you, you will know that you worship the real God and not a figment of your imagination. If your God never disagrees with you, you might just be worshiping an idealized version of yourself. In other words, we create a God who is comfortable with our lifestyle, with who you are, affirms your opinions, and never confronts your sins. We like that kind of God. It's basically a version of you. But the God of the Bible is not a projection of your preferences. He's a holy, sovereign, and utterly other person. And Isaiah cried out when he saw the Lord in Isaiah 6, verse 5. Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Such reference towards God. So true worship begins with trembling awe, not casual familiarity. Second reason is because we forget not only who God is, but we forget who we are. We forget our place. When Kohelet say God is in heaven, you're on earth, he's saying you are Hevel. That Hebrew word that means you are a mere breath. You are a vapor. You are a mist compared to God who is permanent, who is the Alpha and the Omega, who is before all things, and who will endure forever after all things are gone. But you, Hevel. Therefore, come to God with few words. Be quick to listen to Him and slow to speak. Be quick to obey and slow to question His wisdom. True worship isn't about ritual, but your heart's posture towards God. King David says this in Psalm 51, 16 to 17. For you will not delight in sacrifice, or I would give it. You will not be pleased with a burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. And again he says in Psalm 19 verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims His handiwork. Do you see that the creation worshiped God by simply doing what it was made to do? The heavens declare the glory of God. The sun shines, the waves crashes, the trees grow tall. And when they do so, they glorify God, their Maker. That's what glorifying God means, you see. See, sometimes the stars, the mountains, the rocks worship God more faithfully than we do. Why? Because they obey. Because they don't resist their design. But we do. Modern people often struggle with true worship because we are already worshiping something else elsewhere in our lives. The shopping mall, that includes online shopping, disciples us to crave for more, want more, buy more. And social media trains us to perform for approval of others. And our Netflix subscriptions conditions us to seek comfort above other things. We struggle because we're already worshiping something else elsewhere in our lives. And this ritual that we do in our shopping habit, in our social media consumption, these are rival forms of worship that shape how we love. Even before we step into the house of God and worship Him. Our heart is so conditioned to a false worship. We don't know what is a true worship of God. And the tragic result is this. When we come to God, in the house of God, our worship has become about ourselves than about God. What can I get out of this worship session? So if this is what keeps us from true worship, forgetting who God is and who we are, how can we then truly worship God? And this is what Kohelet takes us next to our final point. How can we truly worship Him? If false worship is many words of noise, superficiality, and broken promises, then true worship must be the opposite of that. Kohelet ends the reflection with a clear call of fearing God. That's in verse 7, chapter 5. For when dreams increase and words grow many, there is vanity, but God is the one you must fear. Now, fearing God in the Bible doesn't drive us away from Him like we fear the cops when we are speeding or things like that. Or whatever that you fear. Or when students fear their teachers when they do something dodgy in school. Fearing God in the Bible doesn't drive us away from Him. Rather, it draws us near to Him. So when the Bible says they fear God, what they do? They draw themselves nearer to God. Because they fear God. Now, this is, of course, then, not a fear of punishment, but a reverent awe of God, of His beauty, of His glory, of His greatness. It's the kind of fear a child has before a strong and good father. Now, C.S. Lewis portrayed this best, I believe. I haven't found anything that described this picture of Jesus, that He's strong and kind picture. He's the lion and He's the lamb, right? Do you realize that? C.S. Lewis portrays best in the Chronicles of Narnia, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Let me set the scene. There's these two people, Susan and Lucy, they're talking with Mr. and Mrs. Beaver about Aslan, the lion. And the lion, by the name of Aslan in these Chronicles, it symbolizes Jesus, basically, right? And just let me give, before I read the quote to you, I'm just going to give you a bit of complaint that I have, that I think they've done it wrong. Netflix creating a new series on this Chronicles of Narnia. And you know who's the voice for Aslan? It's Meryl Streep. And everyone knows that the lion, Aslan, in this novel story that C.S. Lewis wrote, is about Jesus. So I just think they cast the wrong voice for that. Anyway, that's forget about that. That's sidetracking there. The quote is this. So this is conversation between Susan and Lucy and Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. Is he, talking about the lion, Aslan, is he quite safe? I shall fear rather nervous about meeting a lion. That you will, dearie, and make no mistake, said Mrs. Beaver. If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they are either braver than most or else just silly. And Lucy said, then he isn't safe? Mr. Beaver replied, safe? Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. And he's the king. That I can tell you. True worship can only begin when we come with fearful awe of God. To fear God is to stand in wonder before Him, to see His holiness, His greatness, His justice, and not to shrink back in dread, but step forward in reverence. Tim Keller, in The Meaning of Marriage, he says this: to be in the fear of the Lord is not to be scared of the Lord, even though the Hebrew word has overtones of respect and awe. Fear in the Bible means to be overwhelmed, to be controlled by something. To fear the Lord is to be overwhelmed with wonder before the greatness of God and His love. It means that because of His bright holiness and magnificent love, you find Him fearfully beautiful. That is why the more we experience God's grace and forgiveness, the more we experience a trembling awe and wonder before the greatness of all that He is and has done for us. Fearing Him means bowing before Him out of amazement at His glory and beauty. In other words, fear is not the opposite of love. Fear is what happens when love meets glory. When love meets beauty, weightiness, greatness. True worship doesn't begin with musicians or a band. It begins with beholding God's glory and beauty. So you cannot worship God up front here as musicians, as singers and worship leaders, as guitarists or as congregation who sing praises to God. That cannot happen if we do not first see the beauty and the glory of God. Then all the things that we do and we say and instrument we play, they're all just empty before God. Sacrifice of fools. It begins when we stop looking at ourselves, our needs, but at who He is. Second thing is true worship listens to God. True worship is shaped by the Word of God, the Word that He speaks to us. It begins with listening before singing, reflecting before reacting, before doing anything. That's how it begins. Worship is a beautiful dance that begins with the creature, you and I, attentively listening to the voice of the Creator, and then we respond to what we hear. True worship is less about singing into a microphone, hoping that God would hear through the loudspeakers, and more about God listening into our hearts through a stethoscope. You can say one thing out loud, but God is listening to your heart. What is your heart is truly saying? Your mouth can sing, I love you, Lord, but your heart says, I love my Netflix session, I love my shopping, I love my money, I love my me time. God knows our heart. He knows our motives. A German pastor in the time of Nazi period by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his beautiful, useful, helpful book, The Cost of Discipleship, he writes this: when Christ calls a man, a woman, a person, He bids him to come and die. We must die to our desires. Bonhoeffer understands that true worship is costly. And for him, it eventually cost his life. Jesus says, Gospel of Mark 8:34-35, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. How many of us live in such a way today? This is how we worship God truly, on his terms. Cheap worship isn't worship at all. If worship is cheap and easy for you, then it is not worship. Worship truly is costly. Yet some of us may still believe we can worship God however we want to do, however we please. I want us to consider how absurd that idea of we can do whatever we want to do when we come to worship God is. Imagine someone trying to honor you, quote unquote, worship you, on their own terms, not on your terms. You are allergic to flowers, yet, so this is a guy who tried to worship a girl that he likes. The girl's allergic to flowers, severe allergy, yet he insists on giving you a bouquet of flowers. It's like, it's beautiful, isn't it? It's on your own terms. How that is absurd. Or this, you love tea. You hate coffee. I don't know if such a person exists, but this is imagination. You love tea, you hate coffee. Yet they insist on buying you the finest coffee there is. Taste this. That's absurd. And that's how we oftentimes come to God. In the same way, Kohelet is saying, you cannot worship God truly if you don't approach him truthfully on his terms, not yours. Jesus says, the only way to approach the Father is through him. John 14:6, I'm the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. As Christians, we often fail in our worship because we forget who he is and who we are. Again, it's not geography, it's theology. We want our worship to serve our needs, our wants, rather than to transform our hearts to know him and love him deeper. But here's the good news. While we deserve to be struck down in our failure to worship God truly, just like Ananias and Sapphira, for God isn't fooled by our performance. Instead, you and I being struck down by God's judgment, Jesus was struck down in your place and my place, so we don't have to be. So that we can do those foolish things, deceiving things to God and not be dead. God cannot be mocked. Don't you think that God hears you and knows your deepest heart's desire? You and I, if we are honest, we deserve to be struck down. We are not because God didn't know, because God is such a fool, but because he struck down his own son in your place and mine. Jesus came as the perfect true worshiper. He guarded his steps, gave his own life as a sacrifice. He let his words be few. Remember when he was falsely accused before Pilate, he was silent. He didn't utter a defense. Even when his life, he knows when his life was on the line, he did not fight back. His words are few. Jesus fulfilled every vow that he made, even unto death on the cross. And on the cross, he offered the perfect offering of love. To the degree that you and I see his sacrifice on the cross for your sake, to that degree, you and I can be free from our superficial and shallow worship of him. Otherwise, you can't and I can't. So whether you're a weary Christian or a skeptic, Kohelet is saying this: you are made for worship. And only then, when you get that, you can live for others, for the glory of God. Let us pray.